James in just 2 seconds. So if anyone has any Republic of Work related questions, as usual, I will pop my email address in the chat box below. And if you have any questions or you'd like to book a tour of our space, just pop me an email. So I'll hand you over to James now.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Thanks for everyone for joining. John, thanks for putting on your camera as well. I can see you there. So if anyone else wants to put on their camera, that would be great. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. So 1 second. So yeah, so delighted to be here today to speak around high performance and lessons in goal setting. And I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes. So nothing too long. And then if you have questions, you can pop them in the chat box and we can take them. We can have a kind of conversation at the end as well. So again, the topic is high performance and lessons in goal setting. In terms of what I'm going to discuss in the short time I'm with you, I'm going to look at the topic of success and what is success and how do we define it. I'm going to look at some tools around goal setting. So very much around my background and tools from goal setting. Going to look at lessons from other high performers. I'll get into, I was very lucky to and still do coach Richard Branson tennis. And so some lessons that I would have learned from him and also from spending time on Necker Island. And then I'm going to just talk about my Give Learn platform and some upcoming sessions that you are more than welcome to sign up for. So hopefully that sounds good. So my first question is if does anyone on the call know who this person is? And if you can pop it in the chat or you can unmute yourself, that would be great. And typically not many people know who it is, especially in Ireland. Okay, so if you're a sports fan, if you are into documentaries, if you're into sport, this guy is John Wooden. So John Wooden was the legendary UCLA basketball coach. He died a couple of years ago at the age of 99. He won more national championships than any other coach. And his definition of success is something that I've always loved. And for me, success is such an interesting thing, right? It's something that, it's out in front of us. If we get promoted, or we're successful. If we get a new house, new car, and so on. So it's something that it's hard to define. But his definition is the best one I've seen. And it was my coach when I was 14 introduced me to Wooden as a person to kind of look up to. So his quote is, "Success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you did your best to become the best you're capable of becoming." So for me, I'm going to get into my tennis career in terms of my ranking and so on. I was 145 in the world. But if I actually take a step back and I ask, was I a successful tennis player? Did I do my best? And so on. And I think it's something that we really should think more about in terms of success. So I'd recommend as a weekend viewing to download a documentary or watch some stuff around John Wooden. So one of the things he created in terms of performance and goals over his course of his coaching career for 50, 60, 70 years was this thing called the pyramid of success. So this is very commonly used among sports coaches, also in business more so now as well. If there's any rugby fans on here, Pat Lam is a big fan of John Wooden. Pat Lam was the coach at Connacht now. I think he's at Bristol. Also Eddie Howe, who's the coach at Newcastle, the manager of Newcastle. He's a huge John Wooden fan. So this is something that Wooden designed over years. It's called the pyramid of success. You can use it as an individual, or you can also use it as a team as well. And essentially what it is, what are the key cornerstones for a team to be successful? And so if you look at the pyramid, enthusiasm, cooperation, loyalty, friendship, industriousness, self-control, alertness, initiative, intentiveness, team spirit, skill, condition, poise, confidence, faith, patience, and all these things lead to what Wooden calls competitive greatness. So if you note a couple of things, you'll see in the center of the pyramid, you'll see skill, because obviously you need to have the skills to be able to do your job effectively. Also, you'll see things like enthusiasm on the bottom right there. So Wooden would talk about, can a team be successful if they're not enthusiastic? And he would argue and say, yes, they can. But the problem comes when you start to miss a lot of those different building blocks. That's when the pyramid could collapse and fall down. So my coach in college used the pyramid of success with the team. And essentially it was around what are the small cornerstone building blocks that are important for this team to be successful. So in terms of my background, which I'll just touch on very briefly, I was a professional tennis player. Well, before that, I was a junior in Ireland, grew up in Swords in Dublin, ended up being the #1 player in Ireland under 18. Got a scholarship to go to Louisiana. I played college tennis for LSU, Louisiana State. If there's any NFL fans on the call, Joe Burrow he was one of the quarterbacks. Not when I was there a couple of years before. And when I actually started to give talks, I started to think about this a little bit more. For me, in terms of performance and high performance and being at your best and so on, I had the opportunity to go to Indiana, where there was 12 guys on the team, 6 guys would play, and at Indiana I would be the #1 or 2 player my first year. Or I could go to LSU, who were top 10 in the country, and 12 guys on the team, 6 guys play, and I'd be the #6 or 7 guy and be kind of scrapping to keep my scholarship and so on. So for me, it's always been around, how can I get around high performers? What can I learn from them? What kind of, what things can I pick up along the way? So I ended up being ranked 3 in America in tennis. And then I played professionally from 2010 to the end of 2015. I was ranked 145 in the world in tennis, and traveled the world for a number of years, playing everywhere and anywhere. And then a couple of years ago, I broke a Guinness World Record for charity. We played for 60 hours continuous tennis with a 5-minute break per hour. So just to kind of give you, I suppose, insight in terms of my background in high performance and where I'm coming from today. So I want to talk a little bit around kind of lessons and goal setting and really the sports to business mindset and what we can learn from that. So when I finished college in December 2009, and I went to play professionally January 2010, my initial target was to be 250 in the world. So that was my focus. I needed to be 250. The reason I need, or the why of being 250 was at the time you would get funding from the Sports Council. So that was the reason why that 250 number was in place. So in tennis terms, for non-tennis people, there's, probably 3,000 people ranked at any time. If you get this thing called a ranking point, it's like saying in golf equivalents that you've got your tour card. And then obviously there's more than 3,000 players playing who are not ranked. But the more points you get, obviously the further you move up the rankings. So I was ranked 3 in America. I came out of college. If you equate my college level to my to go on the professional circuit, I actually should have moved up the ladder quite quickly. But I actually was struggling a little bit performance-wise. I was very up and down in terms of, I would lose in the second round one week, I'd lose in the first round the next week. I just had no consistency of performance. And I was actually introduced to a sports psychologist, a guy, Kevin Clancy, who's from Cork actually. And he actually really helped me in terms of performance. And what he actually did was he said to me, how many points does it take for you to be 250 in the world? So when I actually, I loosely knew how many points I needed to be inside 250. But actually, when I broke it down, and when you see that pyramid on the right, you'll see the 15s and the 27s and the sorry, I'm just going to admit someone in the waiting room here. You see the 15s and the 27s and the 45s and the 80s and so on. So if I was to win an event, I'd get 80 points. If I was to make the final, I would get 45. If I was to make the semis, it'd be 27. If I was to make the second round, it'd be 15 points. So I needed to accumulate points to be inside 250. What was happening to me was I was going every week. Every week I was playing a tournament. I was putting so much pressure on myself to essentially win. Like I had to win. And it was affecting my performance. So I was struggling performance-wise. But actually what we did with Kevin was break down the amount of points I needed. And now when I looked at that pyramid and I went to France and I played an event and I lost in the second round, for example, I'd get 15 points and I'd come back to my room with my pen and I'd go to my chart and I'd tick off the 15 points, and I was moving one step closer to my goal. So for me, it's around, what is the vision? What is the big overriding goal? And then working backwards from that goal as much as you possibly can. So the second piece I did was I started looking at, okay, how many serves do I need to hit a week? How many returns? How many times do I need to go to the gym? My shoulder rehab, all those different types of things, all those little wins. So those little wins that I was ticking off, they gave me the confidence to feel like I could, go and hit my bigger target. So I think sometimes we can get overawed by that big lofty vision, but actually if we come back and we trust in the process, I think we can do great things. I think it's not easy. It's easy to say, set those goals and so on, but it's around those small actionable steps on a daily basis. So I want to talk a little around kind of lessons in goal setting that I would have picked up along the way as well. For me, I made it inside 250, and I'll get on to kind of where I went from there. But in terms of the lessons that I would have picked up, the first one is, and I don't mean to sound kind of fluffy, but the first one is control what you can control. So as a tennis player and in business, you can control a lot of things, and there's a lot of things you can't control. So as a tennis player, I can control, my preparation, but I can't control if it's windy. I can't control the weather. I can't control bad line calls from the umpire. Things are going to happen. Things are going to happen. There's a great saying from Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. So things, obviously, we know that things go wrong, right? The second piece is related really to the previous slide that I showed you, and it's the saying, win the moment. So a couple of years ago, I saw Paul O'Connell speak for non-rugby people. He was the former captain of Ireland, and one of the things that he said actually stayed with me a lot. He talked about when he became captain of Ireland, how there was so much external noise going on. So there was so much with other players, with interviews, with all the different things going on. And he said when he was on the pitch, he thought about, okay, if I can win the moment, so win the next line out, win the next ruck, win the next scrum, all those types of things, that those little things again would be effective in helping the team be successful. And I think in terms of winning the moment around, in corporate life, and your next call, your next pitch, your next demo, whatever it is, but winning the moment and those small details. One thing around striving to being the best at everything, this is a philosophy that I have, that I want to be the best, and I want to work hard. I want to show up at my best and all those type of things. I think some people maybe have a different philosophy around that. But for me, it was always around, I suppose if you're in there, it's around working hard and putting your best foot forward. Really interestingly, one of the guys I played tennis with for a number of years, a guy called Freddie Nielsen, he ended up winning. He ended up winning Wimbledon in 2012 in doubles, and it was a story that it should be a documentary, because he'd never won a tour level match, and then he got a wild card into this event, essentially into Wimbledon, because he was playing with a British partner, a guy called Johnny Murray, and they ended up actually winning the event. And one of the things Freddie said to me was, he said, what's your mission? And I didn't really know what he meant at that time, a few years ago. And Freddie actually worked with a sports psychologist in Denmark. And the sports psychologist, what they spoke about was, companies have their missions. They have what the company is, what they're trying to achieve, all those types of things. But Freddie's thing was, as an individual, what is your mission? So Freddie simply wrote a mission statement for his tennis and said, I am Freddie Nielsen. I am aggressive in these types of situations on the court. I go after my shots. This and this. And then he said after every match, he would sit down and he would look at his mission. So if he honored his mission and he stayed true to it, he was happy enough. If he didn't, he wouldn't be happy, and so on. So I'd encourage you, in terms of goals and that vision, I think the first thing that really kind of is important is obviously the mission, and who you are and what you want to achieve. So for me, in terms of my goals, and again, sometimes people say I'm, I suppose, like an expert on goal setting, or maybe or motivational speaker or something like that. I don't see myself as that at all. For me, when I speak and present, it's always, what are the 2 or 3 things that you can maybe pick up from my career that you can take into action in your own personal or professional life. So my initial goal was to be inside 250. I got inside 250. It took me longer than I thought it would, but I got inside 250. Next goal, get inside 200. I did that. I got inside 200. Next goal, get inside 150. Did that, got inside. I got to 145. Now, obviously, it gets harder the higher you go. The points obviously becomes tougher to move. But my big goal then was to make Wimbledon. And actually, in 2012, I had a really, really good chance of making Wimbledon. I went to Kazakhstan, to China, to Uzbekistan for about 8 weeks. And if I had some good results, I would make Wimbledon that year. And so I missed Wimbledon by 1 spot in 2012. And that's something that, for me, in terms of goal setting, in terms of process, I suppose, started thinking a lot more about the outcome. I started thinking about winning too much. And I think it's easy to say, like, focus on the day-to-day, focus on the process and so on. It's harder to obviously execute on that. But one of my regrets around my professional career is that I didn't make it to Wimbledon. I feel I was good enough, and I obviously missed out. But again, if I go back to the very start of the presentation where I spoke about John Wooden and his quote about success being peace of mind, that you did the best that you can become and so on. For me, I feel like I did the best in terms of my career. So I'm kind of content looking back on that. I wanted to talk a little bit around just a couple of thoughts around, I suppose, peak performance and performing at your best and so on. A couple of things that I'm really passionate about are, first thing is imposter syndrome. And for me, it doesn't matter, male, female. I think we all suffer from imposter syndrome. I think we all go through it to different, in terms of different degrees. If I share a small story from my tennis career, so when I was 145 in the world, I got into a couple of ATP events. So these are the high, apart from the Grand Slam, they're the highest, tournaments you can essentially play. And I remember going to book a practice court, and I went to the office, put my name down the practice court, and then I saw Novak Djokovic was booked on the court beside me. It was at a tournament in a place called Bastad in Sweden. And I looked at the practice and I thought, okay. And then I went back to my room. Now, this sounds absolutely ridiculous, but my thought process in the room was, Novak Djokovic is going to stop his practice, turn over to my court, which is the court beside, look at me and say, what is this guy doing in the tournament? He is a terrible tennis player. So I had all these thoughts that were going on. And I think for me, it's always around, everyone goes through, imposter syndrome, whether you have a startup, whether you have an established business, whether you're an account executive, whatever, it doesn't really matter. We all have, apprehensions, and we all have things that we're struggling with. And I think it's important to highlight that. And I think maybe towards the end of my career, maybe it was a little bit too late. I remember having a conversation with a Swedish player who had been number 5 in the world. And he said to me, you look at me and you think I don't get nervous. I do get nervous, so I think we kind of put people on a pedestal. The second thing is around, very much around comfort zone. And there was a great quote from a boxing coach that I worked with. And his quote was, improvement comes on the edge of chaos. And I think it's really important that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, that, you challenge yourself to get out of your comfort zone. And good things will happen if you can get out of that comfort zone. So I think it's important, whether it's, coming to this talk with me for a couple of minutes and, learning something, whether it's asking a question, whether it's, taking a course, whether it's whatever it is, that you get out of your comfort zone. The last thing in terms of, for me, in terms of peak performance, I think there's three things that are really important in sport, and I think they're important in business. Now, they're not the only things, but for me, the first thing was to be calm. So as a tennis player, when you're playing in an environment and it's very challenging, and you're getting bad line calls or whatever is going on, you're struggling, you're doing this, is to be calm. Second thing is the positivity. Sports person has to have a short mind and a short memory, unless you're, Roger Federer or someone like that. So it's keeping that positivity. And then the third piece, you could say resilience. I really like the word grit. I think it's better than resilience. I think it's just that kind of sticking around, hanging in, competing. We all kind of have our own. I think we all kind of have our own definition of what grit is. A couple of things I wanted to really mention was around this piece around work-life integration. Now I know we're kind of back in the office, we're in and out of the office and so on. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the term work-life balance. I think it's around work-life integration. I think it's around looking after yourself, all those types of things. One of the differences that I really notice with guys who are still playing professionally now, who I'm friends with, is how much more important things are, like sleep and recovery and so on. And I think work and life isn't separate anymore, right? It's not, you don't leave your work somewhere, it's kind of all integrated. So I think really focus on what is work-life integration for you. Secondly is, like, how do you bring your best, right? So like as a tennis player, as a professional sports person, you would talk to if you're playing doubles, you would talk to your doubles partner around, I suppose, what sets you up for success. I'm sure there's people on here who are morning people, there's people who are night owls and so on. There's no right answer, but it's really for you to figure out, well, how do you show up at your best on a daily basis. And then I suppose related to all of it is just having that growth mindset, that performance mindset, that grit, and so on. The last point I'd like to make on the peak performance thoughts around this was one of the people, and I'm going to come on to my kind of lessons from coaching Richard Branson, but one of the people I met in November on Necker is a guy called Astro Teller, who's the head of Google's Moonshots. Really, really interesting guy, fascinating guy. There's lots of talks with him on YouTube as well. And what he speaks around is he has this thing around looking back on what you've done. So he says, if you're starting a new job and you're really, really nervous and you feel out of your depth, or a new role or whatever it is, he said, look back on the previous things you've done in your career. You didn't know the answers to those things then, but you just figured it out, right? So he's the head of Google Innovation. He's like, you will figure it out. And I think sometimes when we look back again, it can give us in terms of that confidence of achievement. So I'd recommend looking into a little bit more on Astro Teller. He's in charge. It's called the Moonshot Factory in Google. So I was lucky enough to spend a significant amount of time on Necker Island coaching Richard Branson. Have also been lucky enough to coach him in London. And the first part of that story is how I ended up actually on Necker coaching him. Was he has a tennis event every year on his island. He brings some of the best business people in the world come to this event, and then some of the best tennis players. So I was 145. I made a lukewarm call to someone who had a connection to the event, and asked, essentially kind of talked my way into the event. But I'm sure there's one or two people on this call maybe that are thinking, should they make a phone call to such and such person? Should they send something, whatever it is? I think for me, when I think about where that one phone call has led to in terms of my career, it's been, incredible. So I met Richard there in 2015. And then very luckily, about a month later, I got an email saying, would I come back and coach him tennis? So I would go for a month at a time, and I would spend time on the island, and whoever kind of comes onto the island as well, essentially. So two people that came, Chris and Crystal Saka. Chris, there's a lot of interviews with them again online that you should check out. Chris is one of the most successful investors of all time. He was an early stage investor in Instagram and Uber and all those types of companies. Really, really interesting guy. actually, funny enough, spent a semester in UCC in Cork, which I don't think many people know about. But so a couple of things stood out from speaking to him. One was he talks about email. So, and I understand people are in different stages of their career and so on, but he talks around people, creating windows to get off email. When you're on your email all the time, you're on someone else's to-do list. And his point is, how can you get onto your own to-do list? And how can you focus on your own projects and so on? So that's one thing that really stood out to me with Chris. The second thing was he talks around, kind of back to that comfort zone piece, but he talks about being interesting and challenging yourself, doing things that scare you, doing things that are a little bit different, a little bit radical and so on. And, I think when I come on to kind of some lessons with Richard, I think that really stands out for me in terms of just essentially challenging yourself. So he talks around when he invests in companies, he says he looks at the founders and he sees, have they had a terrible job? Have they traveled the world? Have they done, things that are a little bit different, a little bit out there? And that's one of the criteria that he has in terms of his investing. One of the other people I met there is Dr. Betty Uribe, who wrote a book called Values, which is worth checking out. So a big thing she said to me one day was, she said, James, who's on your internal boardroom? And I actually didn't really know what she meant at the time. But essentially what she said was kind of related to the mission statement piece was, companies have their boards, they have their chairman, they have their non-execs and execs and so on. So they have their board set up. But she said, James Kluski Inc., who is on your board? Who are the people that you can go to and speak to? Who are the people that you can go and ask for advice and so on? And then, related to that is obviously the mentor piece. And thirdly, she would talk a lot around your brand and building your brand. Even if you're working and happy in a company, she would talk around kind of making yourself, an expert in a certain area, whether it's, whatever works for you. If it's writing and you want to share interesting articles on LinkedIn, if it's, podcasts and you want to start your own podcast, but things that are a little bit different and build your brand essentially. And then finally, I just wanted to kind of touch on a few lessons from coaching Richard Branson. So essentially, I've done it probably, 6, 7, 8 times, where I'd go for a couple of weeks. And I'm not kind of breaking confidence in anything I'm saying, but one of the things that for me stands out with Richard is that he is not he's not, I've met tech people who I'm like, I don't understand what they're talking about. Whereas with him, it's much more, he's just as I said, a normal person. But there's a couple of things that I would have picked up. I would always keep a journal with him. First thing was, be on time. I mean, I think about this in terms of, how busy he is and how everything is going on. Yet the guy is, I've only remember him ever being late once to me. And he came down with a couple of sheets of paper and he said, could you read this chapter of my book? I didn't get through my emails. I'll be, we'll have a cup of tea in a minute or something like that. And I kind of think about that, like that I was the tennis coach on the island. Like I wasn't, I'm not running Virgin, right? But there's that kind of piece. And as I said, pretty much always on time. Secondly, thank you. So really simple. And again, a really simple story, but a friend of mine, so Richard asked me what type of rackets he should be using. A friend of mine sent over a couple of rackets. He used one of them. He said, okay, this is it. Absolutely love it. Can you send me his email? And I said, yeah, I'll send you his email. So I emailed Richard his email. And then about 2 days later, or 3 days later, my friend sends me a message, a screenshot. And it's, dear Will, thank you very much for sending over the rackets. Going forward, you'll be my racket consultant. All the best, Richard. And for me, again, I know that's such a simple story. And I know it's, he has a PA, he has support and so on, but that's the way his mind thinks. And it's much more around people than around the kind of the process piece, for want of a better word. Thirdly, the well-being. Again, like the last time, I was there in November when Omicron hit. And one of the things that stood out with me was that obviously the airline had cancelled flights and so on. And he was under a bit more pressure, and yet every day he would get out and play his tennis, he'd go for a walk. He just is well, like that kind of well-being, wellness piece is just it's just ingrained in his life. And I think I fall into this, where I wake up in the morning, I think, oh my God, I've got 200 emails to get through, and I've got, you know, a proposal to send or whatever it is. I won't do anything, like I won't go to the gym or whatever it is. And whereas his mind, that's the first thing he does. And then feedback. Look, I've just noticed he's always very good at giving like constructive, positive feedback in terms of where you can improve and where things can kind of get better and so on. And then lastly, for me, his positivity. And I mentioned being positive earlier, and it's not like it's not positive in terms of being blind about what's going on. So I just want to be clear on that. But when I would see him and I'd say, Richard, how's your tennis? He'd say, oh, better than ever. I'm playing better than ever. So he just has this, it's always glass half full, you know, so it's always, even with Omicron, it was, you know, we'll get back on soon. You know, it was always trying to be positive around the situation. So I've been very lucky to spend obviously time with him and coaching him, and as I said, still do. I love this quote, and I'm going to kind of wrap up in a second or two. I love this quote, Marie Curie, who won, two-time Nobel Prize winner. You cannot hope to build a better world without improving the individuals. Each of us must work for our own improvement. You know, I think we're all striving to improve. We can all get better. We can all learn from each other and so on. In terms of what I'm doing now, I have a platform. So it's called Give Learn. It's an e-learning platform with live and on-demand classes with global experts, and we have different themes each month. So I will put a sign up in the chat box, and you're more than welcome to sign up for the complimentary session in February there, Raising Your Horizon. So Deirdre worked for 25 years in LinkedIn, IBM, and Oracle, and it's all around imposter syndrome and confidence in business. So there's different themes each month, essentially, with live virtual classes with people from around the world. You have an amazing session in March, the first week of March. A guy who I met on Necker, actually, a guy called Kurt Long, who's a rocket scientist and entrepreneur who's started and sold 3 companies. He's doing a session. He's giving a lecture on the topic of listening. He calls it listening, the greatest business asset you need to develop. So March is around communications. So if anyone wants to learn more on Give Learn and what we're doing and how we're building this performance platform, please connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll put the chat piece in the chat box as well in terms of that Deirdre session. So thank you very much for joining. I'd love to open up to some questions if anyone wants to pop a message in the chat box or unmute yourself. And yeah, really appreciate you giving up time to kind of come and pick up a thing or two from this session. So thank you.
Does anyone have any questions, guys?
I'm just going to pop this in the chat box as well. We got to have a question, surely.
I have one there, guys. How often do you measure yourself back against your goals?
Thank you for that. Sorry, who asked that? Sorry, I was just
Fergus. Great presentation, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Fergus. Yeah, and thanks for asking that. Yeah, so just to clarify the question, how often do you measure yourself back against the goals?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in tennis terms, I would have set yearly goals. So I would have set, okay, I would have set my ranking goals, and essentially then I would have my schedule. I'd have my goals, my plan set out. I would sit down every month and look at them, and to be honest, and I'm not saying this is right, so please don't. I would be pretty obsessed with them as well. So I did things like I changed my passwords. So I changed my password to I will be 250. So and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but so it was constantly on my mind. But I would review them. I would review them monthly, and always be kind of thinking of them. And then if it was pretty apparent that, you know, maybe it was a ranking goal that I couldn't make, or maybe I had a really tough you know, a tough match or something, or a tough run of tournaments, I would kind of not scrap them, but I'd almost like get away from it for a day or two and then come back with a blank sheet and say, okay, here I am now, and this is where I want to get to, and set goals again to go again. So that's the way I kind of frame them and work through them. Thanks, Fergus.
Great, thanks, James. So there's just another question in the chat from Jason. It says, any comments on process versus outcome goals?
Yeah. Look, I'm really interested in that, in terms of, like, you know, I've mentioned a few sports people, and like Joe Schmidt, as a rugby coach, always talks about the process. And I was talking about the process, but we do think of the outcome as well. And it's easier said than done to sit here and say, like, oh, just focus on the process and everything is going to be fine. So I think we need to have these, you know, stretch goals, or goals that are like very challenging but are attainable. But I would try and take myself away from the outcome and focus more on the little details and the little processes that I believe. And I do believe that if when I set the goal, I do believe if I focus on those processes and focus on those small actionable things, that the big goal will take care of itself. But as I said, easier said than done.
Cool. Does anyone else have any other questions, guys? Or no, I don't think so. Cool. So James has kindly popped in the link to the chat with Deirdre McGinn that's on in February, if anyone is interested in signing up for that. The link is in the chat box. So thanks to James for today's Lunch and Learn. It was really informative, and also thanks for giving the attendees the link to that as well. So if anyone does have any Republic of Work related questions, my email is in the chat box. After the talk, you'll all receive a short email as well. I'm just asking you to fill out a quick survey. It doesn't take more than 30 seconds. It's just for us to it's just a quick NPS survey so we can continue to improve our Lunch and Learns. And after that, you have the chance. So if you fill that out, you have the chance to get a free day pass to Republic of Work. So thanks again to James for today, and we hope to see you all again next week.